Right. Greetings. Hello there. My name is Jim Brunsden, and I work for the Financial Times in our Brussels office, and I am going to be moderating this short panel, which means that I have to be extra disciplined on time. So I'm going to be incredibly ruthless. Firstly, basically, I don't have much time to do a long introduction, so I'd just like to say thank you for choosing me to moderate this panel, despite my known extremist views, my uncontrollable obsession with Twitter, and the fact I didn't win the popular vote. So thanks very much for having me anyway. Also, I'm always a bit nervous about high chairs. The last time I moderated something for the European Commission, it started on a chair that was quite high, and it got steadily lower as the panel discussion went on. So I've got this sort of mental image of Martin Selmayr, the Chief of Staff at the Commission, in his office with a remote control, watching it and gradually lowering me down. So I'm counting that Rainer doesn't have anything similar. We're going to have a discussion about, picking up on some themes from the speech we just heard, actually, about SME policy, about what the European Union can do to support small businesses, what works, what doesn't. Why are some SMEs not choosing to list? What barriers are there? And I'm going to pack this all into 20 minutes. So there you go. I'm going to go straight into things, but to kick things off, I've been in Brussels for 10 years, and using every journalist's best friend, known as Google, I have compiled a list of all the EU initiatives to do with SMEs during the 10 years I've been in Brussels. I would like to read you at least part of this list. I have the Small Business Act for Europe, the SME Performance Review, the Green Action Plan for SMEs, the Entrepreneurship 2020 Action Plan, the SME Internationalization Portal, me neither, the SME Instrument, the SME Envoys Network, COSME, Europe's Programme for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, no, it's a joke, it's a band from the 60s, the Red Tape Reduction Award, and my personal favourite, the Enterprise Experience Initiative, which was when the Commission actually sent people to go and work for small businesses and prompted actually one of the most patronising press releases I think I've ever seen, which is dated the 17th of July 2006 and says, instead of drafting EU legislation, 350 senior EU officials will be baking bread, working in carpentry, or repairing oil and gas pipelines. Which leaves me hoping two things. One was that the guys repairing the pipelines had the appropriate safety equipment, and the other one is, basically that the baking bread ones actually, hopefully learned some life skills that were then useful to them afterwards. But this brings me on to my first question, which is going to be to Luc. Luc, hello. Basically, if we've had this whole succession of initiatives, and we seem to be having the same discussions, the same problems come around in terms of SME financing, difficulties SMEs have accessing the market, basically that we're not doing enough to support our entrepreneurs. Why do we keep coming round to these same problems? And what can European Union policy actually do to support SMEs? I mean, are things actually working, given that we keep coming back to these same themes?
Well, I wouldn't say that it is not working for SMEs. SMEs in their different stages in their life can find financing in most of the cases. When they are very early, they can find seed money. When they are a little bit later, they can find venture capitalists, innovation funds that will help them. And they come in a stage, in a certain moment of time, when they have to go for the big money. Right. And that's where in the past they were going to the banks, and since the crisis of 2009 and all the rules that the banks have to respect in terms of collateral before they give capital to companies, those companies are forced to go to the stock exchange where in the past they could escape. So that's the real problem, and they could escape from in the stock exchange in the sense they could escape from all the burden that is coming onto you when you go as a small company to that scene of the big boys, because that's the real issue. Okay. And that's where the problem is.
Being ruthless about time, Deirdre, what do you think about SMEs being able in the past to escape from the stock exchange, whereas now they're dependent on you?
This is a polite evening, so I won't...
No, you don't have to be polite.
I won't use...
You're among friends.
I think that going to a market is is an incredibly important funding tool for enterprise, and particularly enterprise that wants to scale. And going back to the previous speaker, scaling is the most fundamental problem that Europe has and individual countries within Europe have. So therefore, I don't know if it's useful to use pejorative terms like escaping, but I mean, the reality is that Europe is over-dependent on banking finance. And the reality is that if you look back to the 10 years that you were talking about, the problem has got an awful lot worse. So we're actually not dealing with the same problem we could indulge ourselves in dealing with 10 years ago. It is enormously worse. We have 50% less money being raised on markets in Europe for SMEs. 80% of IPOs 10 years ago were small companies. Now that's down to 20%. So we have a bigger problem now. And I think the first path to change and to policy is understanding that, and understanding that we really are at a crisis stage.
Well, I'd like to bring in Fabrice. So, we mentioned this scaling up problem here and this sort of narrowing of options for SMEs. You're someone with extensive experience of this, worked in the regulatory community for a very long time. What do you make of this?
I think the question is not really SMEs. You mentioned 10 years of initiatives. The question here is small and mid caps, meaning funding through the markets. Yeah. And the problem of the EU legislation is that very often it's done for very large companies in mind. The legislator has in mind the blue chips, and then they have to correct it again to tailor it to small and mid caps. So my recommendation is twofold. I think we need legislator to think small and mid cap before drafting legislation. What is the impact? How it favors this category? And I think this category deserves a definition into EU law. Today we have 20 different definitions. We need a real definition of small and mid caps and a tailor-made legislation for that.
But, okay, but I'd like to bring in. Oh, hello. Sorry. I would. Right. For those of you in the back who are talking, I'm about to mention nudity, which is going to get your attention.
We don't
there
hear.
You go.
We don't
right.
Hear,
so
we don't hear ourselves anymore.
No. So it's I'd like to bring in Koen at this point. So I mean, Fabrice just talked about how we need to sort of think about small businesses from the start when we're designing rules, right? But I mean, I've been here for 10 years where they systematically talk about doing that in the Commission. There's the Think Small First principle. Gunther Verheugen, famous, former enterprise commissioner, famously pictured nude on a beach with his chef de cabinet in one of the EU's less fine moments. He used to talk about the Think Small First principle, perhaps not necessarily in that context. And so why are we still coming back to this, that regulation isn't built enough around small businesses?
If I may, I'd like to reply in a different way. Maybe if...
Yes. Talking in the back, please. Hang on. Yeah. We are here for your entertainment. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Maybe if I may bring it back to the basics. Because these kind of groups, and I don't take it personally, they always talk about legislation, policies, white papers, why not a red paper, whatever color it is. But go back to basics. Why does a company go to the stock market? It goes to the stock market for funding. It goes for funding when it is an attractive funding, when it's attractive that the alternative of a private investment is less attractive, or the bank financing is not available, or not available at a cost. Very simple. That's the reason. Right. Why does an investor invest? First of all, because he finds the target or the company attractive. Yeah. And he invests also when he's allowed to invest. Where does it all go wrong? Because we all talk about ecosystems and papers and work groups and ecosystems, whatever you want, but you always miss out the investors. You always. Even if I look at the audience here today, there are not enough investors. And investors are in two categories. It's the retail, and the retail is almost banished from investing in stock-listed companies because of regulation, but most of all, because politicians actually say, you invest in a house, you invest in a savings account, and you speculate on the stock market.
I'd like to bring Luke back in. Luke, this is regulators get out of the way, basically. Is that the right message, you think? That the appetite is there, it's that the regulators have tied us all up in red tape in a way that means we don't invest. By the way, I am an investor, by the way. I have shares in Watford Football Club. I'll have you know. So, thanks. Indeed.
But I think very often regulators meant to do good, but do not know the reality of what the consequences of what they have decided. That's really what is happening many times. They want to organize a problem, or they want to make something right again. So there is a crisis, we have to regulate. And we have done that from 2009 until 2014. When I came in as president of European Enterprises, I was told there were 400 laws waiting in the drawers to regulate. And happily enough, Juncker came in and said, we have to change this. If he will succeed, that's another story. Yeah. But regulation is kind of an element in the mentality of the human being to control a crisis. Yeah. Now we have to do the opposite. We have to deregulate to attract people again, because the regulations have brought the normal citizen out of investment on the stock exchange. That's the real issue.
What do you make of this? Because again, it seems it goes through these phases where there's a sort of a push for Brussels to act and basically do. But actually, I'll put it another way. There are different perspectives about regulation. I mean, we've just been through a huge financial regulatory push in Brussels over the last few years, and the theme of that in general was about reinforcing financial stability and so on. Exchanges were regulated in new ways. Yeah. But what about, can regulation actually really be a vehicle to open up opportunities and create possibilities for small and mid caps to get financing?
I don't think there's any doubt that regulation can be a vehicle to put impetus back in a market. I would say, though, that perhaps the first thing I would challenge the Commission to do is do no more harm. And going back to the earlier speaker, there is one word that transcends all of this, which is incentive. If you strip incentive out of any part of the, sorry to use the term, the ecosystem, it is obvious and inevitable what is going to happen. So I have to say I'm getting a little bit tired of politicians wringing their hands and saying there were unintended consequences of regulation. Those unintended consequences were obvious. They were like a freight train coming towards them, and you have to take responsibility for those consequences. You take incentive out of brokerage, you won't have brokers. You take incentive out of analysis, you won't have analysis. You take incentive out of investment, you won't have investment. And you burden the people in this room overly with too much regulation, you won't have companies coming to the market. It is as simple as that. And I was really struck when I heard that wonderful speech earlier, where we have one part of the European Commission speaking the right language for this community, and I see no evidence that that is translating into the actions in DG Markt and in the way in which they conduct their regulatory reviews. And you said earlier that they have this think small first. I see no evidence of that from a financial regulation perspective. In fact, it's quite the contrary. We've had 10 years of if you build it, they will come, and they won't.
I'm now going to bring
that's why we are where we are.
I'm now going to bring in Fabrice, who is going to robustly disagree with you. I'm promised.
Deirdre, do you agree if I can be a little bit more positive? I think, indeed, we went through a wave of legislation after the crisis, which was there to restore confidence. Let's assume confidence is back, and the Capital Market Union is a unique opportunity to really, piece by piece, create or get rid of the negative incentives that came out of that package. And I see some positive signals. I think in the prospectus, the fact that we could have a prospectus tailored for small and mid caps, but a real one, not a one where you delete some requirements from the full prospectus, a real conceived prospectus for companies and made to disclose in function of their size, their age, their business model, their ownership model. This is, I think, can happen. So let's be vigilant and make sure that it happens. On the investor side, I think the Solvency II directive is a huge negative incentive to invest in equity. And I think the Commission has realized that and has taken already some measures to alleviate requirements on the insurance companies to get more long-term investments on equity. So there are signals in the Capital Market Union, but we have to be very vigilant and continue to push for it.
Okay. I'm very conscious of time, so very quickly I'd like to go around each of you, starting with Koen, and just say, imagine for a moment that I am Valdis Dombrovskis. So I'm the Vice President of the Commission in charge of dealing with these issues. This would require me to A, wear a tie, which I never do, and B, have a Latvian accent, which I can't even begin to imitate. But if we were there and you had to pitch one idea to him and you had 30 seconds of a single rule change or whatever that would make things function better, just a single idea, what would that be? Starting with Koen.
Just one idea. I think it's to allow a community of investors that was excluded, i.e. pension funds, banks, insurance companies, again, to invest for the long term significantly and not to push them into bonds and just liquid paper.
Thank you. Fabrice? Also, Luc?
Oh, I would certainly, as would I be Dombrovski, I would certainly focus on finding the way to adapt the regulations on each of the companies. When I had 28 countries where my company was active, they were not all treated the same way. I had companies that were at the verge of being in an economical environment, other ones were very developed. I treated them with a basic set of rules that they should then, a second set they should probably try to do, and another ones that I tried to learn them about what for the future. So give an adapted set of regulations for the companies following their size, 5 years on the stock exchange, less than 200 billion or 1 billion, I don't care, but adapt it to what they can do.
Fabrice?
As a magic tool to do what Luc wants to achieve, I would suggest to have a common EU definition of small and mid caps. That's the cornerstone. Once you have it, then they must define all the legislation according to that definition.
And last but very much not least, Deirdre.
Fabrice stole mine, so I'm going to get very micro, and I'm going to say, get rid of the tick size regime for the newly defined SMEs, get rid of the idea of unbundling commission that's coming through in MiFID, and get rid of the market abuse directive application to MTFs. Then you would stop doing more harm.
Excellent. Thank you very much. As moderator, if I have my 30 seconds, I think my idea would be when I do these things in future, we should bring our glasses of wine up with us.
Yeah.
I was feeling the absence there. But okay, thank you very much, and have a lovely rest of the evening. And yeah, looking forward very much to the award ceremony. So thank you.